Welcome to This Week in Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights. Here are your hosts, Hector, Kolonas, and Mike LaRosa.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the This Week in Coworking podcast. This is the recap for week 43. I'm Hector Kolonas, and once again, I'm joined by Mike LaRosa. Mike, how are you? Are you in a joyous mood right now?
I am, and that's not just because I'm fully recovered from Taylor last weekend, but it's what I would consider the most wonderful time of the year. And that's not just all the Christmas decorations I'm already seeing at Costco. It's the most wonderful time of year because it's Global Coworking Survey time. So for all of you out there that read those numbers year in and year out from all those different reports, and especially all the data that comes from our wonderful friend Carsten at DeskMag, it's that time of year where he's running that survey. And I believe you chatted with him this week and got some intel on what he's up to this year.
I did. So without any further ado, we have a special guest, Carsten from DeskMag and the Coworking Survey. So Carsten, for folks who don't know you, maybe they've never been to a coworking conference before, or they've never heard about the trends that you put out every year. How long have you been running the survey now?
So the first survey started in 2010, but it was only focusing on members. And so it's been running for almost 14 years.
14 years. Wow. And over those years, how many people do you think have taken these surveys you put out?
I've never actually been asked that before, but with a rough calculation, I would say it's around 14,000 participants, and mostly from the Global Coworking Survey.
That's awesome. And so like that 14,000, is how is it split between like people who work in coworking and people who rent coworking space or coworking members?
So most participants were operators. Like the Global Coworking Survey had a stream or a storyline for operators, but also for members, former operators, potential new members, potential future operators, etc. So like the most people responded from co-working spaces, like from the operator side, although there are far more members in co-working spaces, as most people can imagine. But they're pretty or just harder to reach. And this is also why the current survey focused only on operators, and the next survey will include members again.
Got it. So for this year, it's focused primarily on operators. Are there any new questions this year? And if so, why have you added them?
So each co-working survey always includes a basic set of questions, recurring questions to track ongoing developments. Otherwise, it's not possible to survey long-term trends. But we also have a special topic each year. And then this year, we are digging deeper into why the percentage of profitable spaces has remained or seems to be so low over the past years. Last year, it was around 50%. It's important to note that the other half isn't necessarily unprofitable. Many are simply breaking even. But just to explore this further, we're focusing on creating a typology of co-working spaces, of flexible workspaces. And this typology is not just about like the size of spaces or the location or the target groups they have, but also includes questions about the operator's background, like their motivation, starting conditions, and many more people can see when they take the survey, which you take on, as you can see over there, coworkingtrends.co.
Perfect. We're going to obviously drop the link in the show notes, but also be in the newsletter, and we're going to keep promoting it out. We're going to keep promoting it out for a little bit of selfish reasons. Carsten has also agreed that if we get enough submissions from across all the territories, he'll rejoin us here on the podcast once all the results have been tabulated, and we'll dive into global trends. We'll dive into North American trends. We'll dive into European trends. And then hopefully, if we can get the spread wide enough, look at some of the trends across South America, across Africa, across the APAC region. So if you are listening or watching this on your favorite channel, take a second right now, head over to coworkingtrends.co, fill in the information. How long should it take someone to fill in the survey right now, Carsten?
Less than 10 minutes. So this is also why it's called Trends Survey. It's like surveying trends, like directions, instead of going too much into details.
Perfect. So there you go, guys. 10 minutes, take the survey, share your insights. Carsten, thank you very much for joining us today. I look forward to having you back on the podcast in a couple of weeks when we start digging into those results.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Ciao from Berlin.
So there you have it. Carsten has told us all about the survey this year. Definitely fill it in. It takes 10 minutes. We can't wait to see the results in a couple of weeks. Now, talking about data, we actually saw a pretty interesting data drop this week. This time coming again out of the co-working cafe team, which are, if you don't know, is Yardi's aggregator for co-working spaces. But every quarter they put out a kind of state of the industry type report, leveraging their data set, but also looking at what's happening in the market to share what they're seeing. What's interesting, though, is last quarter, they celebrated the fact that we had just passed around 7,000 locations in the US. And this quarter, we're celebrating a 7% increase, which pushes us over 7,500, like I say in America, 7,500 US locations. The actual number right now is 7,538 co-working spaces across the US. That's up, as I said, 7% quarter on quarter from last quarter. And that growth has actually added around 5 million square feet of co-working space in the US. Now, obviously, this is only looking at the 25 largest US markets. So there is some room there for more growth or contraction based on the markets not being tracked. Outside of that, the fastest growth is actually happening in Nashville, both in the number of spaces, but also in the square footage covered. We saw 22 new locations, or they saw 22 new locations launch in Nashville. That's up 24% from last quarter, as well as an extra two-ish million square feet added in Nashville, up around 13% from last quarter. So we're seeing some pretty interesting growth numbers, a lot of new supply coming onto the market. As we know, if you heard back to the Yardi episode that we sat with Anant Yardi at the fireside, they believe that this number is not total square footage in the US is going to go from about the 100 million square feet that we're at now and well surpass the 1 billion square feet mark. So according to their predictions and their strategy, the data is definitely showing the upwards trajectory towards that higher number. Last stat that they shared that I found pretty interesting in that data set was who the largest operators are in the US. Leading the chart is still Regus, followed closely by WeWork, Industrial Spaces, and HQ, with HQ actually adding the most new locations this year. HQ is one of the IWG brands, in case you're listening in for one of the first times. They actually added 10% more spaces, reaching 236 locations across the US. So quite a large network that not many people talk about very often, but just interesting to see them still in the top 5 there. Regus leading that with 998 locations across the US.
Yeah, a ton of data. It's really been fascinating to see Co-working Cafe consistently release this information and extract some trends. I think some people were really surprised to see that Dallas is now really strongly holding on to number 2 for the total number of co-working spaces. I'm not super surprised by that, just with all the folks that are moving there from both coasts. Some interesting insights too. I think people often wonder why DC has such a high price point. There's an artificially inflated market here in DC because of the height restriction in the actual city. So cost per square foot is always elevated for that. So a really, really great data. I think it also, they pointed out that there are more spaces opening, but that they are actually smaller. Right. And so I think more operators or locations are opening, but they're not taking on those massive spaces. And I would say personally, from what I've heard, part of that HQ growth that has allowed them to do it so quickly has been, they've been scooping up a lot of the former WeWorks, right? So typically the landlord has a really well built out space. WeWork has exited it, whether it was their decision to or not. And the landlord's just looking for the quickest way to get it back up and running. So pretty good all around info. It's interesting to see that the Bay Area really has sunk. I think they're actually out of the top 10 now on both lists for total square footage as well as total numbers of spaces. Really interesting to see that what used to be kind of like the home of co-working, it's all these other markets, right? Which I think would be supported by the transition of hybrid work for the most part, right?
Yeah, here's also actually interesting. San Francisco did report a 12% gain this quarter. So they are seeing a little bit of growth there. As I said, not enough to keep them in the top charts or at the top of the charts, but definitely still a growth, adding around, well, having a total of around 3.6 million square feet. So quite a substantial market, but not in those top charts that like you mentioned earlier. It's also interesting from that data set that they, at being an aggregator, they also reported on average pricing. Interesting to see that with all that growth in supply, membership rates have actually stayed stable, with a median for dedicated desks sitting at around $300 per month, and VO and open time, virtual office and open time co-working memberships only going up $1 over the last quarter on average. So at $120 per month for a virtual office and $150 a month for a kind of hot desk membership. Interesting to see that the number of locations go up, but the pricing kind of staying standard. That's something we should keep an eye on. We've seen in other markets a lot of businesses grow really quickly, a lot of networks grow really quickly, try to make a run at it, but just not being able to make the unit economics work. And we're obviously, unfortunately, saw a story like that this week.
Yep. Was kind of a bummer. So Deutsche Bahn, also known as DB, which is the state-run official rail system of Germany, they are closing all of their co-working spaces in their train stations. And so this is, it was like a real bummer to read. So I remember the first co-working Europe I ever went to in 2013, they had someone from DB that was presenting on this great strategy, part of the smart city strategy, and I'm not quite sure the why, because we're seeing a lot of business travel and co-working blend together, right? We're seeing Industrious and Delta partner up on a couple things. We've seen WeWork do some partnerships before, and we see airline lounges, and we're even seeing like these drop in, like I believe Regis bought one of those booth concepts where you can rent it by the minute and have like a phone booth in an airport lounge. So I don't know if it was because they opened in COVID and it just has had that much of an effect on business travel, or maybe the price point was too high. The price didn't look too steep, in my opinion, or maybe they were overly designed. I don't know. Do you have any insight on any of the sector? Because it was really surprising to me.
Yeah, it is pretty surprising. And as you mentioned, there are a whole bunch of companies who are doing the whole pod booth to check-in kind of on-demand app. I think, maybe it was just overly designed, maybe too focused on membership, given the fact that commuter hubs are very, very transit, right? You're not there for a long time. And it's not like an airport where you have to be there a couple of hours before your flight. You have to be there for delays. Most times with trains, especially in Germany, they're pretty efficient with their train schedules. So I'm not sure how much time people want to spend at the train station, especially if they would just use it to get from point A to point B. So it's just an interesting story. I'm very curious to have a chat with someone there. Maybe we can get someone in. Just tell us, like, what did they learn and what do they do wrong? What do they think they could do better if they had to try again?
Yeah, it would be a shame if it was also just kind of collateral damage, because I believe that the entity lost like 1.2 billion euros in the first half of the year. So if it was already losing money, I know that they've had to do a lot of cuts. They've had some union issues with wages and whatnot. So it would be a shame if that just kind of got caught up in the mix. So that was a bummer. But speaking of money, what's the third piece of news, or I guess content piece, that jumped out at you that you wanted to chat about?
Absolutely. So folks who read the newsletter and have been reading the newsletter know that we love to share stories, insights, what's happening on the ground. But I also really like to find pretty good resources from people who know what the hell they're talking about, especially when it's useful to co-working space operators. So this week I featured a piece from the team at Spacefully where they kind of broke down the two main categories of ad spend that co-working spaces are often have to consider. Firstly, it's social ads, putting ads on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, the likes, and the other is search engine ads, or in this term, and what they refer to as Google ads. I just like the fact that this really makes it simple to think about. If you have unlimited budget, you should be running as many ads to build that brand, build that persona, build that reputation. But if you don't, and that's the case for, as I'm sure we can agree, Mike, for most co-working spaces, they don't have unlimited budget. They have to deploy $1 for where they can get $1.50 or $1.10 back, right? And from what I read from Ruben, I have to agree, right? You have to put your ads where there's intent, but also be really careful about who else is putting their ad spend in the same bucket. Back on stage a couple of weeks ago, we asked the aggregators, are you buying ads for co-working in my city or co-working near me? A lot of them said they weren't, but it doesn't mean that no aggregator isn't. And it doesn't mean that any of the big brands aren't buying ads to see where there is demand. It's just a really interesting topic, and I hope to dig more into this with Ruben. I hope he keeps building out content like this and just really helping operators navigate where they should be deploying their money and how they should be thinking about ad spend, because in all honesty, not all ad spend is created equal.
Yeah, that couldn't have put it better. I think the challenge with Google ads, especially social media ads, it's a low barrier to entry. It's easy to start running some campaigns, we boost a post here, boost a post there. But I think it's just as easy to it's like a runaway train. So I know that there's a lot of space owners there that have tried with really to no avail. So this was a really helpful bit of content to help kind of point them in the right direction. So most definitely encourage them to check that out in this week's recap.
And if you do find any other articles around anything with operations, anything that helps your business, helps you as a business owner, and you think we may have missed it, go over to This Week in Coworking, hit that share button under the tools menu, and just let us know. We'd be more than happy to share it with the rest of the ecosystem. We're doing our best to find as many of them as we can, but you'll probably see things that we'll miss. So we're very, very grateful for the many contributors across the co-working ecosystem that submit links to us every week. They really help us find articles like this one today and share them with the rest of the co-working ecosystem. So we actually had another interesting one this week, Mike. I know that you and I are both excited to speak a little bit more about it. There was some news out of Puerto Rico looking at a pretty big bet, the first Class A co-working offering, in a Class A building on the island from none other than the team at Piloto 151. Well, instead of digging into a little bit more about what we think about it, we actually invited Sophia to join us on the podcast, and it was just great chatting with her. You can see a sample in a little bit. But Mike, before we show that video, what was your key takeaway from this conversation?
Yeah, I just recently met her for the first time at GWA last month. Sophia brings a great amount of energy to any conversation. It was really wonderful getting to hear more about the backstory. Really fascinating to see how the space started out to monetize a distressed asset that she and her brother and family owned, and how they've grown that brand to 5-6 locations now on the island. They've been in the news a lot lately. They had this new venue space that we talked about a lot. So if you are in the process of planning a new space or opening your first space, you want to really pay attention to what they've seen and what they're designing for to offer a wider offering to more folks. And then also to lean into being more of a management of company rather than the leaseholder. So really great conversation. I know everyone will enjoy it. We've got a short clip, as Hector mentioned here, and you'll just have to keep your ears tuned for the full episode to drop next week.
We have a special guest on today's podcast, Sophia Stolberg, calling in from Puerto Rico. How are you today, Sophia?
Hi, Hector. Thank you for having me on your podcast. So exciting.
Good to have you with us. You were in the news again this week, this time for Piloto 151. It's pretty big news. Before we jump into that, tell us a little bit about the co-working history of the island. Like, you've been there since the beginning, so give us a quick recap. When did it start? What are the key milestones we need to know about?
So we were the first in the island, right, which is vague. We started in 2013 as the first co-working space on the island with one location in the historic 500-year-old Spanish colonial city of San Juan. And since then, we've created an entire industry, which is so exciting, right? Every entrepreneur dreams of creating the type of disruption that creates opportunities for others, right? And so for me, I take a lot of pride in the fact that we did open a new industry. And now there are obviously other players in the market. We are still the largest operator by far, but it has created opportunities for others to also join in on the movement.
That's awesome. So the fact that there's others, is it a competitive environment like London or Manhattan, or is it more collaborative, like let's say Chicago or Atlanta? Putting you totally on the spot.
It's a good question, Hector. It's hard to say if it's a competitive environment or not when you're the market leader, to be fair, right? But let's just say that there are other players that have created niche co-working spaces for sub-segments in the market. So there was one that was really focused on traders, for instance, and there are others that have sort of chosen particular niches to focus on. And that's always great because it expands the offering in the entire industry.
That's great. And if we had to perfectly define who flies in your flock, what is the ideal Piloto 151 member?
I love that. You saw our page. We're all about the birds and the pigeons and the metaphors, of course, as you know. And we spoke in Co-working Combos about a few weeks ago, precisely on the power of brand and how we also bring in our Genesis story and all of the aviation metaphor into what we do. The type of person that comes into Piloto is really quite varied. I would say that we have representation, of course, across all business sectors and industries. The important thing is to note, I think, is that we cater to more seasoned entrepreneurs. So the entrepreneurs that come through our doors typically are serial entrepreneurs, have a bit more business experience. Many times it's not their first rodeo. They're on their second or third startup. And that's exciting, right? And I think that one thing that is interesting and it's difficult to accomplish as a brand that we do very well is because when you consider where our locations are based, they're all within a 10-minute drive from each other, right? And sometimes a short walking distance from each other. So we have locations that are 3 blocks away from each other. And what we've done is we've done a really great job of creating a uniform aesthetic, a uniform brand that people understand very well in the market. But each location is in a different neighborhood. And so it also has its own personality. And that I think is a challenging thing to accomplish because you want it to seem like you're entering a Piloto from the moment you walk through the doors, but you also want to balance that with, hey, you're in a new neighborhood. And so the people that would co-work out of Santurce, which is a hipper neighborhood, it's a more urban neighborhood, and many of the pieces there are art pieces, are more urban in nature. They don't necessarily want to come to our Old San Juan location because it's a different vibe. So creating different vibes per neighborhood has also helped attract different types of folks into our spaces that are so close to each other. And that I think is very powerful.
Hi, Sophia. Great to see you again. Appreciate you joining us for a conversation. I know Hector knows a little bit more about the Piloto name, and he just kind of referenced the flock. And I was going to point out, I love the little bird in the back corner there. Two-part question. First, I'd love just to know the significance of Piloto with the bird and whatnot. And second, a lot of people don't just wake up one day and go, oh, I'm going to open up a co-working space. So I'm assuming there might be some correlation to that. Could you just share a little bit about what led you to your first space and what brought you to co-working?
100%. Thanks for the question, Mike. I always love a Genesis story. So when we started Piloto 151, we started out of this location. It's our Old San Juan location, our very first location. And it was our asset. So it was a distressed asset at the time, 2010-ish, right? When the market dropped significantly in the real estate market globally, not just here. And we really had to convert the building. And so my brother and I, who's my co-founder, we were showing the building. It was really a wreck in here. There used to be an aquarium in this building, which is crazy to think about in a 250-year-old building. But there was an aquarium here. And it very much looked like Jurassic Park. All these fake trees everywhere. It was something else. And a lot of people with real estate, they just don't have vision, right? When they walk into a space, I think that's a talent. Not everyone can envision what a place will look like after it's renovated. And when they see a space like this, it's a hard ask, right? So we were showing the building, lots of people coming through, lots of people saying pass. And then this one entrepreneur that moved to Puerto Rico, married a Boricua, and had kids here. He was in tech. He walks into the building and he's like, "This is perfect." And my brother and I, we both looked at each other and we were like, "What?" And then he said, "I want the whole third floor. And what are you going to do in the other floors? Are you going to do like a co-working space?" And we said, "Yes, that's exactly what we're going to do. You read our mind. That's exactly what we're going to do." So in 3 months, we renovated the entire building with that lease in hand and launched Piloto 151. And the story, the Pigeon story, is a really famous story here at Piloto. We're right in front of a plaza, and that plaza is full of pigeons. And we wanted a name that really spoke to the trends that were happening in the startup scene at the time, because Piloto really became sort of the clubhouse for the startup and tech industry in the entire island when we launched, right? And that was the very big need that there was in the market. And at the time, Eric Ries had just finished writing his book, The Lean Startup. I had seen him in South by Southwest and met him and, had the signed book and all of that. They said, this is really what it's about. It's about validating that there is a need in the market, understanding it very well, selling it, right, to other people other than your mom or your brother and sister, and then going after it with more significant investment. So basically creating a pilot project, right? A pilot program where from there, if you see that it has wings, then you invest and continue to grow from there. So that's where the name Piloto comes from. The 151 is the number on the building, on this building, which is also on San Francisco Street, which is great. It has like all of these layers of meanings to it. And then we finished renovating the building, and I remember we had just recently painted the entire facade, and my brother and I were sitting at the cafe in the plaza, and we were just casually watching all the pigeons dirty the facade, right? Freshly painted facade, just dirtying it. And at that point, we did what most entrepreneurs do, right? We said, well, if you can't beat them, join them. Let's adopt the pigeon as our mascot. Let's slap some aviation gear on it. And then it's a pilot pigeon. And that is the genesis of the Piloto pigeon, which is now iconic. I was saying in the co-working combos, it's now like on bumpers and, it's everywhere, which is great. Sometimes people know the pigeon and they don't know what we do.
I love that.
And I think that's a good problem to have, right? That's a good problem to have.
So there you have it. You just heard from Sophia herself, calling in live to the podcast. Look out for the full episode dropping in a couple of days here on the This Week in Co-working podcast feed. Whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube, that will be in your feed. Just hit that subscribe button, whatever people do on YouTube. Hit the button, press the ring, whatever. That thing.
Do the thing.
So just do that. Do the thing, and you'll get the updates. And as Sophia said, steal her ideas, reach out to her, ask her questions. I think, Mike, that's everything, man. I know there was so much in the newsletter today. We had to very much cherry pick which topics we were going to talk about, because we could have dove into 600 other pieces this week, but we definitely just wanted to create a very brief recap, and just to gather some more feedback from you. So, Mike, anything else to say before I kind of read us out?
No, just there's always tons of news in the newsletter, the summaries. So for everything that we couldn't get to on this episode, we encourage you to check out that in your inbox or on LinkedIn. And also, if you've got something to share, or if you've got a question, we're looking for people to hop on and join us for a conversation. So always feel free to reach out, email podcast@thisweekincoworking.com. And last but not least, I booked my ticket. I'll be in Sofia, Bulgaria for Co-working Europe. So if you're going to be there, let me know. I'd love to meet up, and I'm sure I'll be walking around with a mic somewhere, talking to folks and trying to get some hot takes. So keep your eyes peeled. I'll be there.
You heard it here first. Mike is coming to Europe. Definitely make sure that you're heading to Co-working Europe. Ping us at the podcast email address. We'll arrange some time for you guys to chat as well. Other than that, have a fantastic weekend, and we'll be back in your podcast feed early next week with that exclusive interview with Sophia.
Ciao.
Bye.